We are faced today with a crisis of meaning, where many find themselves living lives that they would describe as lonely, unfulfilled, and lacking meaning. At least part of the problem, I'll suggest, is that we are very often aimed at ourselves. The irony is that we are unhappy because we are trying to be happy. And philosophy, I'm going to suggest, has something to say about that. So first of all, let's talk about this meaning crisis. There are a number of people today that are talking about this. People are just struggling in general, sort of struggling to find their place, struggling to understand their purpose, struggling to see their value. Really, all the studies show that we're facing a time in which mental health issues, suicide rates, loneliness, and disconnectedness are at all-time highs. Again, these are just sort of the symptoms of what's being called the meaning crisis. Now, COVID didn't create the problem, of course, but it definitely pressed the issue. I think we just didn't have our normal distractions of work or school or even just being able to go out, and we had to come face to face with ourselves. And again, all the studies are clear that not that it created the problems, but they all got worse. Now, nothing is simple here, but I think that what has, in part at least, led to this meaning crisis is a departure as a culture, as a society, away from traditional values and traditional institutions. We've been a very progressive society for a long time, and we've moved away from things like the value of getting married, having kids, having a family, just hard work sometimes, right? Serving your community, being part of a church, having this sort of like religious values, religious traditions. All of that have been traditional places in which people have found value. But we've sort of moved on from a lot of that, and I think that's had devastating effects. I mean, there are times to move on from traditional ways of doing things. That's fine at times, but we've got to do it so cautiously. Because I think the values of today, of our sort of progressive society, are just too thin to really provide meaning on a broad basis. Now, how should we think about meaning?
Red, I found the meaning of life. Shut your wormhole.
I think a nice way to think of it is that finding meaning is when you find your place in the world, right? It's when your world and your place in it makes sense. A nice kind of analogy is analogy of a sentence, right? So think of the letters of a sentence, right? No single letter, of course, has any meaning at all. It only becomes meaningful when it's sort of grouped together with other letters to form a word. And no single word, I mean, a word in a sense has a meaning, but it can have multiple meanings, and you really don't have anything truly meaningful until the words are grouped together in a sentence. But what's interesting, what I like about the analogy is that the letters and the words even, in a way, sort of drop out. Like, you don't really notice the letters of a sentence. What you notice is the meaning of the sentence, what the sentence is meaningfully saying. So the point of the analogy is to say meaning comes when you sort of fit into something that's bigger than you, right? And I think for us as human beings, right, we find meaning when we find a story within which we can find ourselves, within which we can fit in. So we really can't live meaningfully in isolation. And we don't bring meaning to the table. We have to sort of find it as we fit into the world around us in a way. Meaning comes when we fit into this bigger narrative, this bigger story. So the pursuit here is to find your story and your place in it. Here's what I think often causes us to be unfulfilled in life. We try to make the story all about us. We aim at ourselves, and I think this is a almost sure recipe for being miserable in life. In philosophy, we call this the paradox of hedonism. So think of hedonism as pleasure seeking or being a pleasure seeker, right? What a pleasure seeker does is tries to make oneself happy and fulfilled. But here's the thing, it's a paradox, right? It won't work. You're going to make yourself miserable. John Stuart Mill in his autobiography says, "But I now thought that this end, one's happiness, was only to be attained by not making it the direct end. Those only are happy who have their minds fixed on some object other than their own happiness, on the happiness of others, on the improvement of mankind, even on some art or pursuit, followed not as a means, but as itself an ideal end. Aiming thus at something else, they find happiness by the way." In another place, he says, "Ask yourself whether you are happy, and you cease to be so. The only chance is to treat not happiness, but some end external to it as the purpose of life." Here's his point. His point is that when we aim at happiness, we make ourselves miserable. We have to aim at some other worthy end, aiming at others in order to be happy. Now, Mill is probably the most famous utilitarian philosopher. Utilitarianism, if that's not a term that is familiar to you, it's a ethical theory. I would call it a normative ethical theory that tells you the way you should act. And the way you should act for the utilitarian is to maximize happiness for the most amount of people. For any action in life, you just have to figure out what would maximize happiness for the most amount of people, and that's the thing that you ought to do. Now, I think there's actually a lot of problems with utilitarianism as a moral theory, but there is one question that comes up, right? And it is that why should we care about maximizing happiness in others? And here's Mill's answer. His answer is because if you don't, you're going to be miserable. The way to find happiness for yourself is to not aim at it. It will come as something of a byproduct. Viktor Frankl, who was actually a prisoner in a Nazi concentration camp, wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. I remember reading this in college, and it was pretty impactful. He said that happiness can't be pursued, it must ensue. It must happen as a consequence, right? Not that you pursue it, but as a consequence of other pursuits. Frankl says that we have to find a reason for happiness. And what he means by a reason here is interesting, right? He actually compares it to laughter, right? You have to provide a reason to laugh. You kind of can't tell someone to just laugh, or you can't even tell yourself to just laugh. What you have to do is to focus on a joke or something comical, provide a reason, and then laughter ensues. In the same way that happiness can't just come, you can't just aim at happiness, you have to provide a reason for happiness, and then happiness ensues. So happiness must ensue as a consequence of our other pursuits. But here comes the paradox, right? I mean, if you just want to be happy, like, what are you going to go do? Right? You'll likely just have to appeal to the most base pleasures, probably just go party it up kind of thing. And these are necessarily fleeting, and they leave you almost always more miserable in short order. In fact, I would say the most miserable people on the planet are the pleasure seekers, right? It's those party animals that are out there who set the party as the most important thing of their lives. I mean, what kind of lives are they living? They're likely miserable. They're likely broken. They haven't been able to keep a job. Their family's in shambles. And so on, right? Because they've put their own pleasure above all other pursuits. Or the other mistake is to use something, or even worse, where we use some person as an instrument for our own happiness, right? This is where we instrumentalize the things or the people of our lives to make us happy, but the reality is they can't do that. That's not their design. That's not what they're there for. We'll do this to our friends. We'll do this to our spouses. We do this to our kids for sure, right? Where we try to live sort of vicariously through them. But they can't ultimately fulfill us. To have a meaningful life, you need to stop trying to find meaning and just start doing meaningful things. Don't use the people in your life to serve your own interests, but try serving them instead. When we stop aiming at ourselves and aim at others, we find, by the way, as Mill would put it, happiness and ultimately our place in the world. Now, this is all very subtle. Sometimes we are using or instrumentalizing someone and we don't realize it. We may be doing things that are even quite praiseworthy, at least from the outside. But if we're just doing them for self-interested reasons, right, we're just being selfish, we're just doing them for the praise perhaps, then they're just going to ring hollow. So the way to be fulfilled is not to aim at yourself, but to aim at others and other worthy ends. Now here's what is, I think, most important. What we aim at ultimately, like in the most ultimate sense or the most fundamental sense, matters most. I'm not sure we can find full or ultimate meaning in life without God. Which makes sense, of course, right? Because if God is ultimate reality, then of course we won't find ultimate meaning until we fit into that big story, until we aim at God in all of our pursuits. So the God question is really important here. And some of my favorite quotes of thinkers throughout history are those that are talking about this sort of ultimate need that we all have, and finding our satisfaction in God. So Blaise Pascal says that there was once in man a true happiness, of which there now remains to him only the mark and empty trace, which he in vain tries to fill from all his surroundings. But these are all inadequate, because the infinite abyss can only be filled by an infinite and immutable object, that is to say, only by God himself. Now, I love that quote, but it is a little wordy, right? And that's all right. And you've maybe seen a shorter version of it that's often attributed to Pascal, but it's not actually what he said. I just read you what he said, but this is the sort of version that you'll see on the internet. It's still really, really good. I like it a lot, but it's just not actually what he said. So not Pascal has said, there is a God-shaped hole in the heart of each man, which cannot be satisfied by any created thing, but only by God the Creator, made known through Jesus Christ. And one of my all-time favorite quotes comes from St. Augustine, where he says, "You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our heart is restless until it rests in you." And of course, Jesus puts it this way. He says, anyone who finds his life will lose it. Anyone who loses his life because of me will find it. And I really think what Jesus means here is that when we aim at ourselves and our own pursuits, we may gain the whole world, but we'll ultimately not find life. We find life when we give our life away. When we lose our life for Christ's sake, and aim at God in that ultimate sense. So I think the spirit of our age is to aim at ourselves. I mean, it just is. We hear this all the time in movies everywhere and songs everywhere. I mean, it's just the message of our culture, right? It's that you should be the God of your little universe. You should aim at yourself in all that you do. But I think what we see is that this is the way of destruction. This is not the way to be happy. This is the way of misery. But the way of happiness, the way of fulfillment, is when we find God and put Him in His proper place in our lives.